The train station was louder than usual, yet Daniel felt oddly detached from the noise around him. Announcements echoed overhead, footsteps hurried across the platform, and conversations blurred into an indistinct hum. He stood near a pillar, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, watching the digital clock tick forward. Each second felt heavier than the last, as if time itself was quietly mocking him. He checked his phone again, though he already knew there would be no new messages. The screen reflected his face back at him, tired eyes, a jaw clenched with unspoken regret. Just a year ago, he had believed there was plenty of time. Time to call more often. Time to say what mattered. Time to fix what had slowly begun to fall apart. Now, standing on that cold platform, time felt like the one thing he no longer controlled. A memory surfaced without warning. His father sitting at the kitchen table, coffee growing cold, waiting for Daniel to finish a call that always seemed more important at the moment. "We'll talk later," Daniel had said back then, already halfway out the door. Later had felt endless. Now it felt painfully small. His chest tightened, and he swallowed hard, the weight of that simple phrase pressing against his ribs. The train roared into the station, wind rushing past him, but Daniel barely noticed. His thoughts were elsewhere, replaying moments he had dismissed as ordinary. Missed dinners. Short replies. Promises postponed. He had told himself he was busy, that responsibility justified distance. Success had demanded focus, or so he believed. What he hadn't understood was the quiet cost of that focus, paid slowly over time, unnoticed until it was too late. As passengers pushed past him, Daniel remained still. Guilt crept in, sharp and unforgiving. It wasn't loud or dramatic, it was a steady ache, the kind that settled deep and refused to leave. He realized that regret didn't arrive all at once. It accumulated, moment by moment, through choices that seemed harmless at the time. Choices made without malice, but also without care. His phone vibrated in his hand, startling him. A single message. Short. Final. He read it once, then again, hoping the words might change if he looked long enough. They didn't. A heaviness spread through his chest, and for a brief moment, he struggled to breathe. The world around him continued as if nothing had happened, and that indifference hurt more than anything else. Daniel lowered himself onto a nearby bench, shoulders slumping. He felt smaller somehow, as if the certainty he once carried had been stripped away. In its place was a painful clarity. He finally understood a lesson no one could teach in advance. The things that matter most are often the ones we assume will always be there. And by the time we realize their value, time has already moved on. Daniel sat on the bench long after the train had come and gone. The platform gradually thinned, the noise softening until only distant echoes remained. He stared at the ground, unable to shake the weight pressing against his chest. The message replayed in his mind, not as words anymore, but as a finality he wasn't ready to accept. He felt foolish for all the times he had believed there would be another chance. Slowly, he stood and made his way out of the station. The cold air outside stung his face, but he welcomed it. It felt honest, grounding him in the reality he could no longer avoid. As he walked, memories followed him, uninvited and relentless. Small moments he had overlooked now seemed painfully vivid, the sound of laughter he had brushed off, the patience in a voice he had taken for granted, the warmth of presence he had assumed would never fade. Stopped at a crosswalk, watching the signal change from red to green. People crossed without hesitation, each of them heading somewhere important to them. Daniel remained still, realizing how often he had rushed through life without truly seeing it. He had measured success in deadlines met and goals achieved, never questioning what he was losing along the way. The truth settled in slowly, heavy but undeniable. He had been present everywhere except where it mattered most. Guilt shifted into something deeper, responsibility. Not the kind that demanded punishment, but the kind that demanded awareness. He couldn't undo what had already passed, and that helplessness hurt in ways he had never known. Yet beneath the pain, a quiet resolve began to form. If regret was the price of neglect, then change would have to be the response. By the time Daniel reached his apartment, the sky had darkened. He turned on the light and looked around the room, suddenly aware of how empty it felt. He sat at the table and picked up his phone again, scrolling through old messages, photos, reminders of moments he had once considered ordinary. His throat tightened, but this time he didn't look away. He made a promise, not aloud, but firmly, to himself. He would stop postponing what mattered. He would speak when words were needed. He would show up, not when it was convenient, but when it was necessary. The lesson had arrived too late for one relationship, but not for all the others still within reach. As Daniel set the phone down, a sense of quiet determination replaced some of the sorrow. Pain had opened his eyes, and though it had come at a terrible cost, it had also given him clarity. He understood now that love, time, and presence were not unlimited resources. And from this moment forward, he intended to treat them as the precious things they truly were. The next morning arrived without ceremony. Sunlight slipped through the curtains, soft and indifferent, as if nothing in the world had changed. Daniel sat at the edge of his bed, hands resting on his knees, listening to the quiet of the apartment. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't reaching for his phone out of habit. He was thinking, slowly, deliberately, about how he had been living. He brewed coffee and stood by the window, watching the city wake up. People moved with purpose, some laughing, some already lost in their routines. Daniel realized how often he had mistaken motion for meaning. He had been busy, constantly moving forward, yet drifting further away from what truly grounded him. The thought settled heavily in his chest, but it no longer crushed him. It guided him. He opened his contact list and scrolled carefully, pausing at names he hadn't spoken to in months, even years. Each name carried a memory, and with it, a quiet guilt. He had always assumed reconnecting could wait for a better time, a less crowded schedule. Now he understood that waiting was a choice, and one with consequences. Daniel sent the first message with a deep breath. Then another. Simple words. Honest words. No excuses, no rushed apologies, just presence. As the messages went out, a strange calm followed. There was no guarantee of forgiveness, no certainty that bridges could be rebuilt. But for the first time, his actions matched the lesson he had learned. Later that day, he visited a small park near his apartment. He sat on a bench, watching children play and couples walk slowly, hand in hand. He noticed how people leaned toward one another when they spoke, how attention changed everything. These were moments he had once dismissed as trivial. Now, they felt sacred. A reply came through. Then another. Short, cautious, but real. Daniel felt a subtle warmth spread through him, not relief, not joy, but connection. It was fragile, like something newly formed, and he treated it as such. He knew rebuilding trust would take time, patience, and consistency. And for once, he was willing to give all three. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Daniel sat quietly, reflecting on the lesson life had delivered so late and so harshly. He couldn't reclaim what was lost, but he could honor it by living differently. Awareness had replaced ignorance, intention had replaced assumption. And though regret still lingered, it now served a purpose. Stood and walked home with a steadier pace, carrying not just sorrow, but responsibility. The past had taught him something irreversible. And this time, he was listening. Time passed, quietly and without announcement. Weeks turned into months, and the sharp edge of Daniel's grief softened into something more manageable, though it never fully disappeared. It lingered in small ways, in the pause before he sent a message, in the extra moment he took to listen, in the care he brought to conversations that once felt routine. Loss had changed the rhythm of his life, and he no longer rushed through it. Daniel became intentional with his days. He showed up when invited and reached out when silence felt too long. He learned to sit with people without checking the time, to listen without planning his response. There were moments when the ache returned unexpectedly, catching him off guard, but he welcomed it. It reminded him of what mattered and kept him grounded in the present. One evening, while sorting through old belongings, Daniel came across a photograph he hadn't seen in years. He studied it carefully, tracing familiar faces with his eyes. Instead of pain, a quiet gratitude filled him. The past was no longer something he wished to escape, it was something he carried with respect. He understood now that memories were not burdens, they were lessons preserved in emotion. As his relationships grew stronger, Daniel noticed a shift within himself. He felt lighter, not because life had become easier, but because he was no longer avoiding what was important. He spoke honestly. He apologized when needed. He expressed appreciation without waiting for special occasions. The fear of vulnerability that once held him back had lost its power. Standing by the window one night, watching the city lights flicker on, Daniel reflected on the lesson he had learned: too late to change one outcome, but not too late to change his life. Time, he realized, was not just measured in years or hours, but in attention, presence, and care. What you gave it determined what it gave back. He took a slow breath, feeling a sense of peace settle over him. The regret that once consumed him had transformed into wisdom. And while he could never rewrite the past, he could live in a way that honored it. Some lessons arrive gently. Others arrive through loss. This one had come late, but it stayed.